The first time Lieutenant Janelle Hayes walked across the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the steel under her boots vibrated with raw power jets screened overhead. Deck crews darted in choreographed chaos, and ocean winds whipped against her flight suit. It should have felt like a dream. She'd worked her whole life for this moment. But dreams are funny things, especially in places where you don't quite belong. Someone whistled as she passed. Not the respectful kind. A mocking, nasal tone that carried over the deck noise. A grinning senior mechanic, chewing gum and elbowing his friend, muttered just loud enough, "Careful, fellas. Don't let Barbie trip on her heels." The other laughed. Benchwarmer Barbie, more like. That was. The moment the name stuck. Not on her badge, not in official records, but on lips and in locker rooms. Benchwarmer Barbie. Pretty face. No real flight hours. Just another PR stunt, some whispered. Diversity checkmark. Trophy pilot. They judged her before she even spoke. Never mind that she graduated 7th in her naval aviation class. That she had more sim hours than most lieutenants on board. That she knew the A-18 inside and out, including maintenance protocols, weather calculations, and emergency cold start procedures. None of it mattered. She had the wrong look, the wrong gender. And worst of all, she was new. So they stuck her. In the shadows. Janelle spent her first few weeks on the Lincoln as a glorified errand runner. Fuel checklists, intake inspections, briefing notes, simulator babysitting. Other lieutenants clocked launch hours. She clocked coffee breaks and silence. Every denied request for cockpit time was answered with the same condescension. Next cycle has. We'll call you when we need a Barbie on the stick. Don't worry, the jet's heavier than your lipstick. But Janelle wasn't just listening. She was watching. Every late-night briefing she wasn't invited to, she downloaded it and studied it alone. Every malfunction on the flight deck, she found out why. She asked questions when others weren't listening. She kept a notebook with every manual update, every checklist change. Where others slacked off after hours, she drilled herself with cockpit procedures until muscle memory took over. She wasn't just learning how to fly. She was preparing for a moment no one believed would come, and she knew it would come, because she had seen the same arrogance that had gotten people killed in training. Pilots too cocky to double-check a rudder. Chiefs too proud to admit a frozen valve. And in those failures, she saw her purpose not to be the showpiece, not to break the ceiling just for herself, but to be ready when it mattered. And deep down, she believed something the others didn't. One day, she whispered to herself on the catwalk above the hangar, "You'll all wish Benchwarmer Barbie was in the sky." That day came faster than anyone expected. On the morning of February 12th, a sudden cold front swept down from Greenland, dragging a vicious Arctic storm into the carrier group's path. Icy winds slammed the ship. Visibility dropped. Systems began to freeze. A-18s that had been prepped for a timed diversion launch began shutting down. One by one, the deck turned to chaos. A handful of jets still stood prepped and primed, but no pilots were on standby. One went down to illness. Another got injured below deck. And then the voices on comms began repeating the same terrifying words over and over again. "We don't have a pilot." Down in the ready room, while officers scrambled to find anyone certified to fly, a quiet voice cut through the panic. "I can fly it." Heads turned, confused, disbelieving. Lieutenant Hayes stood there, helmet under her arm, calm as the eye of a storm. Her tone wasn't desperate. It wasn't emotional. It was precise. "I've studied every cold weather launch protocol. I've simulated Arctic recovery patterns for 2 years. You've seen my scores. I'm ready." They laughed, but that laughter was about to freeze. Asterisk. The sky above the USS Abraham Lincoln had turned from steel blue to an angry gray. Sleet hammered the flight deck like falling nails. Waves thrashed the hull below. It wasn't just a storm, it was a siege. And the carrier was losing. The crew scrambled to save what they could. The A-18s, poised and ready just 30 minutes earlier, were now covered in ice. Canopies frozen shut, control surfaces stiff as stone. The launch catapult's hydraulic beasts designed for brute force groaned under the pressure, their motors slowed by sub-zero gunk. And the mission timer kept ticking. The carrier strike group had a critical objective: launch 2 jets for a high-altitude radar scatter to divert satellite tracking. A move designed to give the rest of the fleet time to reposition without being tagged by foreign eyes watching from orbit. Missing the launch window meant exposing an entire Pacific deployment strategy. Inside the command center, tension was slicing through every word. "Where's Lieutenant Owens?" Captain Briscoe barked. "Down in medbay," the officer of the deck replied. "Collapsed from hypothermia during pre-flight." Lieutenant Coker? Still grounded. Head cold turned into sinus barotrauma. "Can't fly." Briscoe turned to his flight ops chief. "Anyone else?" "Not cleared." "Everyone else is either down or disqualified." The room fell into silence, only the radar blips ticking in the background. "No pilots?" The captain snapped. A faint voice came through the comms. Static buzzed. "I'm here, sir," the voice said. Clear. Calm. Female. It was Lieutenant Janelle Hayes. Briscoe squinted. "Who?" "She's been with us 2 months," someone muttered. "Barbie," another whispered. "The one they never let fly." Janelle's voice came again, firmer this time. "Captain, I'm qualified. I've run these exact launch simulations under worse weather than this. Digitally, yes, but dozens of times. I know the system failures. I know the cold protocols. I can fly." Briscoe eyed the deck report. 2 jets still prepped. 1 with full telemetry, both rapidly freezing. "No one else?" He asked the room. No one answered. The storm outside wailed louder, rattling the glass. They had less than 10 minutes before the jets iced beyond USA, BILIT, Y. Finally, Briscoe leaned toward the console and spoke into the comm. "Hayes, report to Catapult 1. You have clearance." In the launch prep area, the ground crew stared in disbelief as Janelle suited up. She moved fast, no hesitation. Helmet on. Oxygen lines clicked. Gloves pulled tight. Her hands didn't tremble. A mechanic stepped in front of her. "You ever even launched in this kind of storm?" She looked him straight in the eye. "No, but I've prepared for it more than anyone else on this ship." He paused, then nodded, stepping aside. The launch crew got to work. They sprayed fast evaporating de-icer on her jet, wiped sensors with alcohol rags, and slammed fuel caps closed. The deck was slick. The fighter engine sputtered at first, resisting the freeze, and Janelle climbed in like it was any other Tuesday. Inside the cockpit, she ran through every system with the grace of a veteran. Control stick responsive. HUD flickering but readable. Navigation holding. Her boots pressed into the cold steel floorboard. Outside, the launch boss gave the command. "Catapult 1, ready aircraft. Final prep, go." In the tower, Briscoe watched in silence. "Let's see what Barbie's got," someone muttered, but no one dared laugh. Janelle radioed in. "This is Hayes. All systems go." The deck boss held up a gloved fist. "Launch in 30 seconds. Snow swirled over the deck. Steam hissed from the catapult. The fighter sat like a sleeping dragon, rumbling with barely contained force. Everyone expected hesitation. A rookie's stutter. A mistake. But Janelle only whispered to herself, her lips barely moving. "You've been ready your whole life. Time to fly." At Catapult 1, The world slowed to a breathless hush. For a split second, the chaos of the storm faded into the background. All eyes on deck, in the tower, and across the ship are locked on one woman. Lieutenant Janelle Hayes sat poised. In the cockpit of her frozen A-18, fingers wrapped around the throttle, breath fogging the inside of her mask. Beneath her, the jet trembled, turbines building to a vicious scream. Wind ripped across the deck, slapping ice into her canopy. Visibility? Maybe 10 feet. But she wasn't blinking. She had one job. Get this bird off the deck in under 20 seconds, or the entire mission would collapse. Final check, came the voice of the launch officer, barely audible through the storm. Janelle responded, crisp and confident. Lieutenant Hayes, all systems green. Locked and loaded. The deck boss dropped his hand, pointing forward. Launch. The catapult system hissed, clamped, then exploded into motion. Steel screamed, G-forces slammed Janelle into her seat. The F-18 surged forward like a bullet from a railgun ice shattering across the wings, tires skimming across the slick runway. 1 second. Her hands held firm. The stick trembled. 5 seconds. Gear lifted, nose angled up. 12 seconds. The blizzard swallowed the sky. 19 seconds. Airborne. Cheers erupted from below deck, but no one watching could believe what they'd just seen. The impossible just happened. A jet, encased in frost, flown by the pilot nobody trusted, had launched into a storm without hesitation and without a single error. Briscoe leaned forward in the control room, a slow smirk pulling at his lips. She's flying. Damn right she is, someone whispered. On her HUD, Janelle saw her altitude rising clean 1,000 feet. 3,000, 6,000. The storm still raged, but her controls were tight. Readouts held steady. The auto-stabilizers strained, but obeyed. In her earpiece, command crackled. Hayes, confirm operational status. She responded without pause. Climbing to designated altitude. Radar scatter protocol executing. ETA to apex. 2 minutes. No one interrupted. No one questioned her. She was in control now. Back on the carrier, Chief Petty Officer Rourke, the grizzled launch tech who had once led the whispers about Benchwarmer Barbie, stood in stunned silence. His headset slipped slightly, but he didn't bother adjusting it. She actually pulled it off, he muttered. She's not done yet, replied Ensign Ramirez. She's got a second bird to escort. Briscoe turned. Get the second F-18 ready. Who's next up? Silence. Then, again, that voice. Captain, Hayes said through comms. No one else is rated for sub-zero launch right now. I am. Briscoe raised a brow. You suggesting you double launch? Affirmative, sir. Let me land, quick reload, and I'll take the second jet up before conditions collapse. Someone in the control room scoffed. That's insane. No one relaunches in this kind of weather. Briscoe stared out at the storm. She does. 15 minutes later, Hayes had returned fast landing. Perfect touchdown despite crosswinds and ice-crusted wires. She was all ready, suiting up for the second run as the crew scrambled to refuel and thaw the last jet. No hesitation. No complaints. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes laser-focused, and something in the crew had shifted. Mechanics who had once rolled their eyes now moved faster. Launch officers nodded without snide remarks. Even Rourke handed her the helmet with a grunt that almost sounded like respect. She climbed into the second cockpit like it belonged to her because now it did. That second launch? 17 seconds. Smoother than the first. The woman they once called Benchwarmer Barbie had just outflown every seasoned pilot aboard the Abraham Lincoln twice. And they hadn't seen anything yet. Asterisk at 30,000 feet. Lieutenant Janelle Hayes looked down on the angry storm cloud that had almost crippled the fleet. From this height, it was just a swirling bruise beneath the horizon. But down below, sailors were still clearing ice, and the crew was still talking in stunned voices. She should have felt victorious, but there was no time for that. Her radar sweep blinked alive, alerting her to a minor anomaly. 3 objects pinging faintly, far from normal flight patterns, circling just outside U.S. naval airspace. The exact scenario the decoy flight was designed to catch. "Command, this is Hayes," she called over comms, confirming unidentified contacts at Grid Echo 4. They're holding formation outside the cloud bank. Altitude, 31,000 feet. No transponders. Possible surveillance craft. Briscoe's voice came back, tight and direct. "Copy that. Maintain course. Do not engage. This is a scatter flight only. Let's keep the bait in the water." Janelle didn't argue, but she didn't relax either. Her sensors blinked again. One of the unidentified objects had changed course. Slightly, barely noticeable, but enough for someone paying attention. And Janelle was always paying attention. She rolled slightly to her left, adjusting course by a degree, not enough to provoke, just enough to keep a cleaner view. Behind her, the second A-18 flown autonomously under her guidance mirrored the shift with military precision. Both jets maintained radar scatter formation, just as the mission required. But now she was watching, reading every blip like a heartbeat monitor. And then it happened. The lead unidentified contact accelerated. Straight toward her. Her heart didn't spike. Her breath didn't quicken. She only narrowed her eyes. "Command, contact is now closing at 600 knots. No response to ping. This is not routine flyover. Requesting permission to break protocol and shift to recon pattern." There was a long pause. Too long. Finally, Briscoe came back, low and tense. "Granted. Don't engage, observe only. Keep your distance, Hayes." "Roger that." She rolled hard, diving 200 feet, then angled her bird northeast, cutting the sky clean. Her wing system rattled briefly, ice still clinging in places, but the controls held. Like the aircraft itself had come alive under her touch. As she closed in, the blip sharpened. Definitely not civilian. No ID tags, not U.S. design, but it flew like it belonged. Her targeting system flickered briefly, auto-focusing. Then she saw it. A foreign electronic surveillance craft, heavily modified, unarmed but outfitted with enough antenna arrays to monitor half the ocean. She clicked on her comm. "Command, confirming visual. Unidentified aircraft is unarmed surveillance class. Paint scheme and markings match Eastern pattern." Another pause. "Copy that, Hayes. Maintain shadow. Do not engage. If they cross into carrier airspace, we call DEFCON protocols." Janelle stayed on the target, but she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Back on the Abraham Lincoln, the mood had shifted from awe to concern. People weren't just watching to see if Hayes could fly. They were watching because now, the fate of the entire fleet's positioning was in her hands. In the CIC. Combat Information Center. Briscoe's fingers tapped nervously against the console. "She's alone out there," he said under his breath. "She's the best we've got," replied the XO. That was the first time anyone on the Lincoln had said that out loud. Up above the clouds, Janelle knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't just a show of strength. It was a test. Who was watching the Pacific? Who would respond? And how fast? And now they'd gotten their answer. Lieutenant Janelle Hayes. 2 launches. 1 cold storm. 1 Lieutenant Janelle Hayes was 60 miles out, flying in the kind of gray no textbook could prepare you for. Her A-18 carved the air like a knife through mist, every instrument on edge. Behind her, the autonomous wingman mirrored her exact positioning precision. Only a handful of aviators could achieve even with a live pilot. Below the clouds, the carrier group was adjusting course. Their entire repositioning plan relied on her holding this distraction flight. But now, something new had entered the game. The surveillance craft she was tailing was no longer alone. Two more blips emerged from the northern vector. Small, fast, running dark. They weren't flying erratically, but they weren't broadcasting identification either. That told her everything she needed to know. They were military, and they weren't supposed to be there. "Command, this is Hayes," she said, voice steady but cold. "We've got two new arrivals. No transponder signal. Based on flight pattern and formation, I believe we're looking at 5th-gen fighter escorts." Back aboard the Lincoln, Captain Briscoe's face turned grim. "They're testing us." His XO muttered, "See how far we let them push." "We don't. Not with her alone up there," Briscoe said. He turned to the comms officer. "Get her out." "Sir?" came a second-voice Chief Rourke, who had been quietly listening from the corner. "If she disengages now, they'll see it as weakness. She's flown 2 miracle launches." Let her finish the message she started. Briscoe didn't respond, not right away. Then he leaned into the mic. "Hayes, you have 5 minutes of observation. Then you return to base." "Understood?" "Understood, sir." Inside the cockpit, Janelle lowered her visor. The screen lit with heads-up telemetry. She angled upward slightly, adjusting altitude. The A-18 groaned in the cold, but followed. She wasn't planning to dogfight, not in this weather, and not without orders. But she was going to show them they weren't dealing with another silent fleet. She tightened formation behind the lead. Surveillance craft, close enough to be seen, close enough that the jets on board, sensors would start pinging alerts. Then she toggled a command on her control panel, a simple signal pulse. No voice, no weapons, just a cold electronic tap on the shoulder, a soft ping to say, "I see you." The enemy craft shifted. For the first time, it flinched, and that was all Janelle needed. Back on the Lincoln, the comms room lit up with response. Activity. The surveillance plane had pulled off, slowing its course. The 5th-gen fighters, upon detecting a lock-on signal, not a missile, just radar targeting, immediately changed formation. "They're backing off," the XO said. "Not running, but not advancing either." "She forced their hand," Briscoe muttered, "and she didn't fire a shot." Hayes stayed on them until they disappeared from her radar. She didn't chase, didn't provoke. She kept her course clean, her behavior professional. Every move calculated, like she'd done it 1,000 times. Then, once the sky was quiet again, she pulled her throttle back and made the call. "Command, this is Hayes. Mission complete. Targets have withdrawn. Returning to carrier." A moment of silence. Then Briscoe's voice. "Copy that, Lieutenant. We'll be ready." By the time she touched down on the deck, her 3rd flight in less than 2 hours, there was a crowd waiting. Not an official reception. Just people. Crew members, pilots, deck hands. People who had doubted her just that morning. No one said a word as she climbed out of the cockpit. Then Chief Rourke stepped forward and offered his hand. "Damn fine flying, Lieutenant." She shook it, her face unreadable under the helmet. Then softly she replied, "I told you I wasn't just here to warm benches." He smiled for the first time. "No, ma'am. Today you flew circles around the whole damn fleet." The storm finally passed sometime after midnight. The sea calmed to a restless sway. On the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the icing crews worked by floodlight, clearing frost from wings and catapults, while jets steamed quietly on standby. But something was different now. The silence wasn't just post-storm calm, it was respect. Inside the ready room, Lieutenant Janelle Hayes sat alone at first, peeling off her flight gloves, her hands still trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline she had been suppressing for hours. She hadn't just launched twice in freezing conditions. She hadn't just shadowed enemy aircraft without backup. She had changed her story, and everyone knew it. One by one, pilots began trickling in. Not a word was said, but they stayed grabbing coffee, pretending to check their tablets, sneaking glances her way. Then Lieutenant Commander Brent Cooper, the squadron's senior pilot, stepped in. A veteran of 3 combat tours, Cooper was the kind of man whose handshake could silence a room. He had once laughed when Janelle first introduced herself. Said something like, "Didn't know the Barbie line came in pilot editions." But now, he stood before her with a paper in hand and something like humility in his eyes. "You've been assigned flight lead tomorrow," he said. Janelle blinked. "Flight lead? For the Sunrise Patrol. 4 birds. Your point. You earned it." She looked at the paper. Flight lead. It was real. But Cooper, why me? "There are others with more hours, more." He cut her off gently. "More hours? Sure. But no one else launched into a frozen hurricane, flew blind at altitude, and stood down foreign recon without losing their nerve. That's leadership, Hayes, not just stick and throttle." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and the guys want you in the morning brief. They're actually listening now." At 0500, Janelle stood at the front of the ready room briefing her team. 4 FA-18s, a routine patrol flight around the Pacific's northern corridor. She spoke clearly, with no dramatics, outlining formations, fuel contingencies, and alternate landing protocols. No one interrupted. No one smirked. When she was done, Cooper gave a simple nod. "Mount up." The sun broke the horizon as they took off, this time in clear skies, but with a crispness in the air that reminded everyone of the storm's bite. As Janelle led her flight into formation, something settled deep in her bones. This was where she belonged. The silence of the sky, the roar of the engine, the calm control of a mission executed clean. Not one of the men behind her doubted her lead, not anymore. And down on the deck, sailors and deckhands watched her jet climb into the morning light, no longer whispering. Benchwarmer Barbie behind her back. She was Hayes now, Lieutenant Janelle Hayes, flight lead, fleet protector, the woman who didn't just survive the storm, she mastered it. That evening, a private message arrived in her inbox. A commendation was being submitted to the Secretary of the Navy. Her name was at the top. A second message followed, quiet, encrypted. It read, "Intel confirms the foreign craft altered course. Your actions averted escalation. Stand by for debrief." Closed the message, set the tablet down, and looked out at the ocean. She had come aboard the Lincoln mocked, ignored, and boxed in by stereotypes. But she didn't shout. She didn't complain. She flew. And in 19 seconds, she rewrote every story they'd ever told about her. The orders came down just after dusk. Lieutenant Janelle Hayes was summoned to the Lincoln Secure Intelligence Room, a rarely used chamber behind the Combat Information Center, windowless, dimly lit, and cold in more ways than temperature. Inside, Captain Briscoe stood stiff beside 2 unfamiliar men in pressed Navy uniform suits. Not flight suits, intelligence. "Lieutenant," Briscoe greeted her. "Have a seat." She obeyed, masking the tension in her shoulders. Her hands rested calmly on her thighs, but her mind was moving faster than any jet she'd flown. One of the agents, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, slid a folder across the table. Inside was a grainy, zoomed-in photo. Her jet, mid-air, shadowing the foreign surveillance aircraft. Her radar lock. The evasive maneuver. And then a satellite image time-stamped 22 minutes later of a foreign destroyer turning away from U.S. waters. "You didn't just rattle a recon craft," the gray-haired man said. "You stopped a full-force probe." Janelle met his eyes. "I followed orders. You did more than that. You outmaneuvered them before we even confirmed their presence. The second agent leaned forward. Lieutenant, you may not know this, but they were waiting for a reason to test our response time. Your actions didn't just delay them. It caused a pause across the entire sector. Their warships slowed. Communications dropped. Air patrols pulled back. He paused, then added, You changed the tempo of an entire standoff. Janelle's jaw tightened slightly. She didn't know whether to feel proud or alarmed. Briscoe finally spoke. They want to fly you to Pearl Harbor. Immediate debrief. Direct to Pacific Command. She looked up. Am I under investigation? Quite the opposite, said the gray-haired agent. They want to hear how a junior lieutenant read a sky full of threats faster than anyone on the bridge. But that's not all, Briscoe added, softer this time. They're offering you reassignment. Janelle blinked. Reassignment? Special Joint Task Unit. Rapid Response Command. Fast in. First contact intercepts. High risk. Higher clearance. Promotion path. It was everything she'd worked for. Everything she'd dreamed of since her first solo flight. But her mind drifted not to medals or ranks, but to the carrier. To the crew who had watched her fall, mock her, and rise. And to the 4 pilots who now followed her formation without. A whisper of doubt. She cleared her throat. And what about the Lincoln? Briscoe exchanged a look with the agents. They're watching now. Your team listens. You've built something here, Hayes. But if you stay, it's back to carrier ops. Routine patrol. Maybe command in 5 years. Or, said the agent, you take the fast track. Lead missions with global impact. Use what you did up there on a scale that really matters. She looked down at the folder. At the evidence. At the moment where it all shifted. She had earned respect here. But the world was calling for something more. Do I have to decide now? Briscoe nodded. They want your answer by morning. Wheels up at 0600, if you say yes. That night, Janelle stood alone on the flight deck. The stars were sharp and infinite, the carrier quiet beneath her boots. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. Or proving the doubters wrong. She had already done that. Now it was about choosing who she wanted to be. A leader here. Or a symbol out. There. Was she done showing what she could do in 19 seconds? Or was that just the beginning? She closed her eyes and felt the wind on her face. The same wind that once tried to freeze her in place. Now, it felt like it was asking her to fly again. Asterisk at 530. Lieutenant Janelle Hayes stepped onto the flight deck for what could have been the last time. The wind was light, the ocean calm. The sun was just beginning to bleed across the horizon gold and violet stripes, painting the steel of the USS Abraham Lincoln. She took it in slowly, like a photograph she might never see again. The deck crew was already prepping aircraft for the day's rotation, and though no official ceremony had been called, whispers had spread fast. They knew. She was the girl they used to call Benchwarmer Barbie. Now she was the one being asked to help lead one of the most elite airborne units in the Navy. And this morning, everyone was watching. Chief Rourke caught up to her near the edge of the catwalk. You flying one last round? He asked, eyeing. Her helmet tucked under her arm. She shook her head. Not today. He nodded, then hesitated. They'll miss you up there. I'll miss them too. A few feet away, Lieutenant Commander Cooper waited quietly. No insults this time. Just a stiff nod of respect. You changed the tone around here, he said. Hell, you changed me. She smiled faintly. Takes a lot of pressure to turn iron into steel. He returned the smile. So, you going? I haven't told them yet. But she had already decided. Inside the CIC. The 2 Navy intelligence officers stood waiting. Their jet on the tarmac. Their offer still open. Captain Briscoe stood with arms crossed, watching her approach. No more doubt in his eyes. Just curiosity. Admiration. "Lieutenant Hayes," said the gray-haired agent, "the plane is fueled. Once you step aboard, it's classified clearance from there on out. No going back." Janelle looked down at the folder he'd handed her the night before. All the credentials. All the praise. It didn't tempt her anymore. It validated her, but it didn't define her. She turned to Briscoe. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to decline the reassignment." The agents both flinched. "Excuse me?" "I said no," she repeated, voice steady. "I'm staying." The younger agent stepped forward. "Lieutenant, this is a once-in-a-career opportunity. I didn't come out here for a career." She cut in. "I came out here to serve. And right now, this crew needs a leader more than Washington needs another resume." Briscoe said nothing for a moment, then slowly cracked a rare smile. Permission granted. That afternoon, as the carrier repositioned for the next phase of deployment, a ceremony was held on deck. It wasn't official Navy tradition. It wasn't medals or stars. It was something better. A small plaque was mounted next to the catapult, where she'd launched that frozen A-18. It read, "LT Janelle Hayes, 19 seconds that rewrote the sky. January 3rd, 2025. First launch. Cold deck, emergency response." One by one, deckhands came forward and touched the plaque. Pilots saluted it. No one called her Barbie. She was Hayes now. Lieutenant Hayes, the one who flew toward the impossible, and did it 3 times before breakfast. That night, Janelle sat alone in her bunk, finally letting the noise fall away. She thought of her early days, the mockery, the whispers, the doubt. How they had laughed when she trained alone. How they rolled their eyes when her name came up on the flight board. All it took was 19 seconds for everything to change. But what they would never understand was this. It wasn't the storm that shaped her. It was all the quiet hours before it. The hundreds of late-night simulations. The hours in the freezing hangar. The repeated drills no one else cared to do. They made her ready. So when the storm came, she didn't flinch. She flew. And she wasn't done yet. Tomorrow, she'd take her squadron into the clouds, not to prove herself anymore, but to teach the next generation how to hold the sky with both hands. The end.